Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're kicking off with, well, a pretty radical idea, actually. But it's one that, maybe counterintuitively, offers some real hope.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Hope from what, exactly?
It's the idea that maybe the best source of hope for the planet's future comes from looking really closely at the world's worst environmental crimes.
That does sound counterintuitive. Usually when we talk about climate change or biodiversity loss, the story is, inevitable tragedy, overwhelming complexity, systemic failure. Like a runaway train we just can't stop.
Exactly. But what if we shift that view? What if we stop seeing environmental damage as just this unavoidable side effect of capitalism or progress,
And instead see it as,
as the result of deliberate choices,
mm,
as actual crimes
mm.
committed by specific people, specific organizations? If we frame it that way, suddenly it doesn't look so unstoppable.
Ah, I see. So it becomes something solvable. We can actually identify the actors, the killers of the earth, so to speak. They're not some abstract force. They're people making calculations, often very profitable psychological decisions.
Precisely. And that reframing is what this deep dive is all about.
And getting this right means being precise with our language, I suppose. Social scientists might call it green crime, while lawyers tend to use environmental crime.
Right, and that legal definition gives us teeth. The European Parliament's 2024 definition is really useful here. It defines environmental crime as unlawful conduct done with intent or significantly serious negligence.
Intent or serious negligence, that's key.
Yeah, involving the release of harmful materials or, damage to nature itself.
That framing demands a huge psychological shift, doesn't it? Can we really get to a point where society sees, say, ecocide with the same moral weight as we view murder?
It's a radical thought, but we're starting to see movement. New laws trying to criminalize ecocide, for example. It's moving beyond just fines, regulatory slaps on the wrist.
Towards actual prison time for individuals,
Yeah.
even those high up the chain.
Exactly. So our mission today is to dig into the why. Not just what happened, but why do people, often educated, powerful people, make choices that cause such massive harm?
And we're going to use a framework for that, right? The 6 pillars model.
That's the one. Developed by criminologists, it's called the 6 Pillars of Green Crime. And what it shows is that the motivations aren't really alien. They're actually quite, well, depressingly familiar parts of human psychology.
Like a psychological skeleton key, you said? For unlocking everything from emissions fraud to, say, illegal logging cartels.
That's the idea. So let's quickly lay out these 6 pillars because they really underpin everything we'll discuss. Pillar number 1, ease.
Ease. So just inertia, the easy way out.
Pretty much. If lying or dumping waste or just taking a shortcut is faster, cheaper, less hassle than doing the right, sustainable thing, well, people under pressure often take the path of least resistance.
Makes sense. What's next?
Pillar 2, impunity. This is the psychological green light. It's the belief, maybe even the certainty, that you can get away with it. Doesn't matter if you're hiding deforestation deep in a forest or fiddling accounts in a boardroom.
Okay. Ease, impunity. Pillar 3.
Greed. Straightforward, really. The drive for profit, personal or corporate. Sacrificing the long-term common good for that short-term financial gain.
Right, the classic motive.
Then number 4 is rationalization. This is the story we tell ourselves. Everyone else is doing it, or the environmental impact isn't that bad, or I had no choice. It makes the harmful act seem okay, or at least justifiable.
The self-deception piece. Got it. Pillar 5.
Conformity. This is huge in organizations.
Yeah.
The pressure to just go along, not rock the boat. In a corrupt culture, saying no feels almost impossible. Responsibility gets so spread out that nobody feels personally accountable for the damage.
Yeah, diffusion of responsibility. We see that a lot. And the last one.
The last pillar, often missed, is desperation. And this isn't just, say, poverty driving someone to poach. It can also be executives panicking, try to save face, avoid financial ruin, or cover up a crime once it starts to unravel.
So ease, impunity, greed, rationalization, conformity, and desperation. And by using this lens, we can move beyond just prosecution.
Exactly. We can identify the weak spots in the system and figure out how to prevent the crime from happening in the first place. Remove the opportunity.
Okay, so where do we start applying this?
Let's dive into a classic case of calculated corporate crime, Dieselgate. The Volkswagen emissions scandal. It's such a textbook example. You've got the eco-anger, the corporate complicity, the greenwashing.
Ah, yes, where consumers were basically turned into unwitting accomplices.
Precisely. But to really get the crime, we need to understand the context. And that means understanding the role of regulators. people like Alberto Ayala.
He was at CARB, right? The California Air Resources Board. Instrumental in that initial 2011 investigation into VW's clean diesel claims.
Yeah. And his view on being a regulator is, well, illuminating. He doesn't see regulations as obstacles. He calls them the essential, often invisible, guardrails for modern life.
Guardrails ensuring things like safe food, clean water, clean air. Things we take for granted until they fail.
Exactly. And when they work, the regulators are basically invisible. Thankless job, really.
It's a tough spot. Ayala mentioned constantly battling two opposite misconceptions, didn't he? Either that regulators are just there to block business,
Or the opposite extreme, that they're somehow in bed with the industry they're supposed to oversee.
right. He stressed that you actually need collaboration, mutual respect, especially with engineers, to create rules that work. Rules that protect the environment, but also allow for, good vehicle performance.
But in Dieselgate, that trust, that collaboration,
Yeah.
it was completely shattered. And the focus was on this specific pollutant, nitrogen oxides, or NOx.
NOx. Okay, maybe a quick science bit. Why is NOx the bad guy here?
Well, basically it comes from combustion. And the hotter the combustion, the more NOx you get. Diesel engines, they run hot and high pressure. That's how they get good torque and fuel efficiency.
But that same design feature inherently creates more NOx.
Exactly. And regulators target non-NOx because it's seriously harmful. It leads to acid rain, particulate matter, and crucially, ground-level ozone. Smog, essentially.
That super pollutant ozone, which is particularly bad because it's formed right where people live and breathe thanks to traffic emissions.
And the health effects aren't trivial. We're talking immediate impacts like worsening asthma, more ER visits in cities.
And long-term risks, too, like increased susceptibility to respiratory infections.
Yeah, and get this. Studies on nitrogen dioxide, NO2, basically concluded there's no threshold value below which health effects can be ruled out. Any exposure carries some risk.
Wow, no safe level. And cities bear the brunt, right? Even
Yeah.
though diesel cars were a minority of vehicles.
Fewer than 1 in 5, yeah. But they were responsible for something like 65% of direct NOx emissions from road traffic in European cities. A huge chunk from a small part of the fleet.
Okay, so the U.S. had stricter NOx rules than Europe at the time. VW wanted to sell diesels there. How did they possibly claim they had a clean diesel?
They cheated. Sophisticated cheating, using what's called a defeat device.
And this wasn't some physical add-on part?
No, it was software, clever code, programmed to recognize when the car was undergoing an official emissions test in a lab.
How could software know that?
Because the test procedure was standardized. Car makers knew the exact simulated driving cycle. It mimicked a drive in LA, apparently. The software looked for telltale signs. The steering wheel not moving, specific patterns of acceleration and speed, the virtual road curves.
Things that only happen in a lab test, not on a real road.
Exactly. And when it detected those conditions, wham! It switched the engine into a special low-emissions mode just for the duration of the test.
And then back on the actual road.
It reverted to the normal high-torque mode, which also meant high NOx emissions, way above the legal limit.
So the motivation seems pretty clear. Back to our pillars.
Absolutely. A blend of ease and greed. Volkswagen had this huge ambition. Become the world's #1 car maker. Breaking the U.S. market with diesel was key.
But building a genuinely clean diesel, one that met U.S. standards and kept the fuel economy and power buyers wanted, that was hard and expensive.
Hugely expensive. Complex exhaust treatment systems, engineering challenges. So the internal calculation was, it's easier, cheaper, to just use the basic emission controls, fake the tests, and hope nobody notices. That's the ease pillar.
And the greed driving the ambition for market dominance.
Right. And the fallout, legally and psychologically, was immense. This kind of systemic corporate lying. There's a term for it, isn't there?
Yes, epistemic malevolence. It sounds academic, but it's quite chilling.
Explain that a bit.
It describes a kind of dark disposition within an organization, a willingness not just to lie, but to actively undermine knowledge itself, making true information hard to find or covering things up systematically.
So it's not just one rogue employee, it's cultural.
Exactly. It needed engineers, managers, probably executives, all playing along, normalizing the deceit until it became essentially company practice. And in doing that, they betrayed every single customer who bought a clean diesel thinking they were making a good choice.
Turning them into, as you said, unwitting agents of environmental destruction.
And that feeling of betrayal, that sense of being duped, that fuels the eco-anger we talked about.
Which, surprisingly, research suggests isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right. It feels awful, obviously, but studies show that feeling angry about climate inaction or environmental crime is actually functional. It's adaptive.
How so?
Higher levels of eco-anger correlate with more collective action, protesting, activism, but also stronger individual actions, like really committing to recycling or cutting consumption.
And you mentioned something surprising about mental health.
Yeah, counterintuitively, it's linked to better overall mental health. The idea is that expressing that anger productively, turning it into action, stops it from festering into, say, paralyzing eco-anxiety or grief.
That anger is often a direct response to greenwashing, isn't it? Companies making misleading claims.
Absolutely. The European Commission found over half, 53% of environmental claims are vague, misleading, or just plain unfounded.
And this connects to another concept, hostile choice architecture.
Yeah, this is interesting. Choice architecture is just how our environment is set up to nudge our decisions like default settings on a website.
Okay, so what makes it hostile?
Hostile choice architecture is when that setup is deliberately manipulative, steering you towards choices that are bad for you, or in this case, bad for the planet, often while making you think you're choosing well.
Can you give an example?
Sure, think about restaurants. The default main courses are almost always meat-based, right? They're often positioned as the standard, maybe even cheaper or safer choice.
So choosing the vegetarian or vegan option requires extra effort, extra thought, cognitive friction.
Exactly. The default setting is hostile to sustainability. Or think fast fashion, highlighting a tiny sustainable line while the entire business model thrives on throwaway clothes.
It's smoke and mirrors. Are there efforts to combat this?
Yes, thankfully. New EU rules are trying to tackle it, like banning vague terms green, eco, natural, unless they're backed by solid proof, and forcing companies to be upfront about planned obsolescence.
So bringing it back to Dieselgate and the 6 pillars, how did they all play out inside VW?
Well, we saw ease, choosing the simple emissions system and software cheat over costly engineering. We saw greed, the drive for market share and becoming number one.
And the internal culture.
That's where rationalization and conformity were critical. Engineers likely told themselves the extra NOx wasn't that big a deal compared to jobs or profits, or they just conformed. In that culture, questioning the cheat might have seemed like career suicide. It was easier, safer to just go along.
Okay, so Dieselgate represents that calculated, almost quiet crime happening in boardrooms and labs. Part 2 takes us somewhere completely different.
Yeah, we're shifting from the corporate office to the violent, dangerous front lines of environmental defense, where impunity, that belief you can get away with anything, often leads directly to murder.
And we're focusing on a really tragic, emblematic case from Brazil. Maria Sospito Santo and Jose Claudio Ribeiro, or Zé Claudio.
A couple murdered in Pará State back in 2011. They were activists campaigning hard against illegal logging, against people being forced off their land, trying to protect the forests where they lived.
Zé Claudio had gained some international recognition too, hadn't he?
He had, just months before he was killed, he gave a TED Talk. And he had this incredibly powerful line, "Killing trees is murder." It was a direct challenge.
And the really heartbreaking part is how preventable it might have been. The system failed them completely.
Utterly. They'd received constant death threats. Their house was attacked. There was even a failed assassination attempt just weeks before they were murdered. They reported all of it.
And the police response?
Nothing. No protection offered whatsoever. It's chilling.
What was the motive behind the killing?
Pure greed tied to land. The man eventually convicted, Jose Rodriguez Moreira, was an illegal logger and rancher. He wanted their land designated as an extractivist settlement project, meant for sustainable use by local communities.
He wanted to turn it into a cattle ranch.
Exactly. Profitable cattle ranching. Maria and Zé Claudio were denouncing his illegal land grabs, his logging. They were standing in his way.
So he had them killed.
Brutally. The hitmen even cut off Zé Claudio's ear, apparently as proof for Moreira that the job was done. It speaks volumes about the ruthlessness involved.
And this kind of violence happens because what they were defending in the Amazon is so incredibly valuable, not just locally, but globally.
Immensely valuable. It's the planet's largest biodiversity hotspot, a crucial climate regulator. Its health affects weather patterns worldwide, our ability to sequester carbon.
We often hear about reforestation as a solution, though. Can't we just replant?
That's often a dangerous myth, or at least an oversimplification. Professor Dolores Armenteros, an expert on this, warns that restored forests, they rarely, if ever, achieve the same complexity, the same biodiversity, the same carbon storage as the old-growth forests they replace.
So losing primary forest is essentially an irreversible loss. in human timescales.
Pretty much. These are ancient ecosystems. And deforestation isn't a small problem. It accounts for maybe 10–15% of global carbon emissions. Preserving what's left is absolutely critical.
You also mentioned something called climate velocity, happening fast in the Amazon.
Yeah, in 2022, the Amazon saw Earth's highest climate velocity on land. Basically, it means the climate zones are shifting so rapidly that species, plants, animals have to migrate incredibly fast to follow conditions they can survive in.
Faster than they've ever had to before.
Much faster. If they can't keep up, they face extinction. It's a massive unfolding crisis within the broader climate crisis.
Psychologically, what drives these land conflicts? Is it just the tragedy of the commons, everyone out for themselves?
That's often the assumption, but it's more nuanced. The real psychological driver seems to be ownership, but not just legal ownership.
How do you mean? Isn't clear legal title a good thing?
It can be, but in contexts like the remote Amazon, purely legal ownership, just having a deed on paper, can sometimes foster what's been called reckless entitlement.
Reckless entitlement.
Yeah, the owner, maybe sitting far away, sees the land purely as an asset on a spreadsheet, disconnected from its reality. They feel entitled to extract maximum value, regardless of the consequences, because, well, they own it.
But there's another kind of ownership.
Yes, psychological ownership. This is about connection, love for a place, feeling responsible for it, a sense of stewardship. That kind of ownership dramatically increases the willingness to protect it.
Like indigenous communities?
Exactly. Cultures that have lived with the land for generations often exemplify this psychological ownership. And the data backs it up. Studies show that granting indigenous peoples collective land rights in the Amazon leads to significantly lower deforestation rates. You protect what you feel connected to, what you feel responsible for.
Which brings us back to the murders of Maria and Zé Claudio and the terrifying impunity that allows such things to happen.
The dark figure for environmental crime, the amount that goes unreported and unpunished, is just astronomical. The path to justice is often blocked or simply doesn't exist for many victims.
And there's a structure behind this impunity in places like Brazil.
Yes, Paulo Busse, an environmental lawyer there, described it as the network. It's like a multi-tiered system designed to facilitate and protect these land crimes.
What are the tiers?
Tier 1 is at the top. Politicians, big agribusiness interests, they set the agenda, often opposing forest protection, creating the political cover. Tier 2 is organized crime. They provide the capital, launder the money, handle logistics for illegal logging or mining the machinery, transport, etc.
And Tier 3. That's where the violence happens.
That's where you find the hitmen. And this is where desperation intersects with greed and impunity.
How so?
While Tiers 1 and 2 are driven by greed and political power, the actual killers in Tier 3 are often recruited from desperation. Impoverished laborers may be paid shocking small amounts, sometimes just a few $100s, to carry out murders.
So they're driven by economic necessity, exploited by the tiers above them.
Precisely. They're the most visible criminals, but they're enabled by the impunity and driven by the greed higher up the chain. They act out of desperation because their own options are so limited.
And the consequences of this systemic impunity are devastating.
Horrifying. In Brazil, for over a decade, violence against environmental defenders went largely unchecked. Between 2011 and 2022, estimates suggest only about 1% of killings of environmental defenders actually resulted in a conviction. 1%.
1%, that's staggering. Even in Maria and Zé Claudio's case, the killer was convicted but wasn't caught for years.
That's right. Moreira was sentenced in absentia to 60 years, but he evaded capture for a long time, living freely. What kind of message does that send? It reinforces the core belief of impunity. Even if you're caught, even if you're convicted, you might still get away with it.
So, applying the pillars to this case, impunity is blatant police ignoring threats, the murderer evading justice. Greed is Moreira wanting the land for cattle profits.
Rationalization probably played a part too. Moreira likely felt entitled to the land as the owner, dismissing the rights of the community, and desperation drove the hitmen at the sharp end of the violence.
Okay, we've looked at the psychology behind corporate fraud like Dieselgate and the violent greed driving Amazon deforestation. Now, how do we actually use this understanding of the 6 pillars to prevent these crimes?
Right, moving from analysis to solutions. And this brings us to deterrence theory, but with a specific focus on green crime, which often gets called slow violence.
Slow violence. Why that term?
Because unlike, say, a sudden assault, environmental crimes like pollution or illegal logging often unfold over time. Their impacts might not be immediately obvious, but Crucially, the decision to commit them is usually not impulsive. It involves calculation, risk versus reward.
And this is where that psychological quirk, temporal discounting, messes things up.
Big time. Temporal discounting is our tendency to massively overvalue immediate rewards compared to future ones, even if the future reward is bigger.
Like choosing $100 now over $150 next year, or eating the cake now versus better health later.
Exactly the same principle. We discount the future. So for a company or an illegal logger, the guaranteed profit today from selling dirty cars or cutting down trees feels much more real and compelling than the potential risk of fines or prison years down the line.
The future consequence just doesn't weigh heavily enough in the present decision.
Precisely. And deterrence theory tells us something critical here. It's the certainty and immediacy of detection that deters crime much more effectively than the severity of punishment later on.
So long prison sentences are less effective if people think they won't get caught in the first place.
That's the core idea. To counteract greed and ease and to beat temporal discounting, you have to make the risk of getting caught feel real, immediate, and personal.
Personal meaning. Hitting individuals, not just the company.
Yes. Harsher penalties, including prison time, for the actual decision makers, CEOs, executives, financiers, combined with really well-resourced regulators and enforcement. If you know you might go to jail, that changes the risk calculation in the boardroom dramatically, much more than just a corporate fine, which might be seen as a cost of doing business.
Okay, so the 6 pillars model isn't just for understanding, it's a blueprint for prevention, like situational crime prevention.
Exactly. Changing the situation to make the crime harder or less appealing, we can target each pillar. To counteract ease, increase the effort needed.
Ow.
Mandate better design, better maintenance for engines, mines, factories. Make the shortcuts technologically harder or more obvious. For example, maybe design software that flags suspicious overrides internally, so a defeat device can't be hidden even within the company.
Makes sense. What about tackling impunity?
Increase the risk of getting caught. This means smarter, targeted enforcement. Think about Sea Shepherd tackling illegal fishing.
What do?
They didn't try to patrol the entire ocean. They focused resources on known illegal fishing hotspots at specific times of year when poaching for things like Patagonian toothfish was highest. Strategic presence based on intelligence, making detection much more likely in those high-risk zones.
Okay, targeted enforcement. And hitting the greed pillar. You said stop chasing the physical stuff.
Yes, focus on the money. Follow the illicit financial flows. Seizing ivory tusks or illegal timber is important, but it doesn't cripple the operation like seizing the profits does.
So financial investigation is key.
Absolutely. Get financial experts tracing the money trails, freezing bank accounts, seizing the assets, the cars, the houses of the traffickers, the illegal loggers, the corrupt officials. If you cut off the money, these often highly capitalized criminal networks can't function.
And what about those internal pillars, rationalization and conformity? How do you fight the culture within companies?
That's about building ethical resilience, removing the excuses, strengthening commitment to doing the right thing.
How do you do that practically?
Research suggests fostering what's called public service motivation, reminding employees, engineers, managers, everyone why their work matters beyond profit. Connecting it to societal good, to safety, to environmental protection, it can help people resist the pressure to conform or to rationalize harmful actions. It builds a defense against the just following orders excuse that enables disasters.
These are all important strategies.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a truly radical solution earlier, something that challenges the whole foundation.
Yes, the rights of nature. This is a fundamental legal paradigm shift.
How so?
The dominant Western legal tradition sees nature as property, an object, something to be owned, used, exploited, disposed of. That view inherently enables destruction.
So the shift is?
To recognize nature not as property, but as a legal entity in itself with inherent rights. Rights similar to those we grant to corporations or municipalities. The right to exist, to flourish, to be restored.
That sounds revolutionary in our legal context.
To us, maybe. But, as we said, Western law is arguably millennia behind. Indigenous legal systems have recognized nature's rights, lived in that reciprocal relationship for centuries. We're just starting to catch up.
Are there actual examples of this working?
Yes. Te Urewera in New Zealand, formerly a national park, is now a legal entity that effectively owns itself, governed by a board including Maori representatives. Ecuador's constitution explicitly grants nature the right to exist, persist, and be restored. When something has legal rights, you can't just destroy it with impunity.
It changes the entire legal standing. So fighting green crime needs a whole coalition of people, doesn't it?
A huge diverse coalition. You need the investigators like Interpol or NGOs like the Environmental Investigation Agency digging deep. You need dedicated regulators like CARB setting those guardrails. You need the financial cops tracing the money.
And crucially, you need the people on the front lines, the environmental defenders like Maria and Zé Claudio.
Absolutely. Their courage is essential. And what's really interesting is that participation itself breeds commitment. Studies show when people get involved, whether it's activism, citizen science, even just changing their own habits consciously, it fosters a deeper sense of stewardship.
It's a positive feedback loop. Taking action changes your mindset, which fuels more action.
Exactly. Hashtag tag to outro.
So let's try and bring this all together for everyone listening.
Yeah.
The core message here really is that green crime isn't inevitable. It's not some unstoppable force.
Right. It relies on predictable patterns of human psychology. Those 6 pillars: ease, impunity, greed, rationalization, conformity, desperation.
And if we understand those pillars, we can actually anticipate where the risks are highest. We can design systems, policies, enforcement strategies to counteract them. We can prevent these crimes.
And part of that is embracing our own emotional responses. That ecological grief, that eco-anger we talked about. They aren't signs of weakness. They're functional. They're necessary fuel.
We shouldn't suppress them.
No, we should channel them, let them motivate us. But we also have to be really vigilant about our own thinking traps.
Like what?
Like disconfirmation bias. That tendency to just reject evidence, however strong, if it clashes with what we want to believe. Oh, that report can't be right.
And the other big one, wishful thinking.
Bang! That little voice whispering, it can't really be that bad. Or don't worry, someone else, some expert, some government will fix it. The evidence often shows, unfortunately, that yes, it can be that bad.
So we need realism alongside the hope.
Exactly. And perhaps the most powerful psychological tool we have against complacency is foresight.
Foresight, how do you mean?
Climate psychology research suggests that actively, vividly imagining plausible negative futures, really picturing London underwater, or your region facing food shortages due to climate shifts, can be incredibly motivating.
It makes the future threat feel more immediate, breaks through that temporal discounting.
Precisely. It forces you to confront the reality. Is this the future I want? Is this the future I accept?
And if the answer is no,
then that visualization, that uncomfortable foresight, becomes the spur for action now. It reminds us the future isn't just something that happens to us. We are creating it actively with every choice we make and every choice we avoid.
So the final thought is, we have the tools, we understand the psychology.
We just need to keep fighting the systems that enable crime and fighting the psychological tendencies in ourselves and others that allow it to continue.